First, Bob Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey. He's also former chief of staff for the House Committee on Aging, as well as being former communications director for both Congressman Rangel and Conyers of New York and Michigan, respectively. Bob, good to have you back.
Good to be with you, Alan.
I mean, perhaps is this why George Meany stated position on this in 1955 was actually that, quote, it is impossible to bargain collectively with the government. And, of course, FDR thought it would be intolerable, inexcusable, and it would just be an opportunity for mischief-making by the few over the many. Were these two staunch collectivists necessarily in the wrong when they had that observation to offer years ago, Bob Weiner?
Well, the bargaining with the government is done through elections. And, Alan, you mentioned, and Amy, you mentioned the unsustainable pension plans, but they're unsustainable because so much money in the overall, yes, it's complicated, has been taken from the states by view of the tax cuts and by view of the wars, that there's little money for the federal government left to do infrastructure, jobs, and assistance to the states and localities. So that's the basis of the financial crisis that the states are in. And if without the two wars and without the tax breaks for the rich that are bleeding our economy, we might not be in this mess, as Bill Clinton was not in this mess at the end of his term.
Bob Weiner, to you, Amy brings up an interesting point. Perhaps the loser tomorrow has that much more motivation for their voters in November, or do you believe that perhaps they're not that connected, Bob Weiner?
Well, I do think that the trending, as I mentioned at the outset, is toward Barrett against Walker. But right now, you are correct. It's Walker by 3, according to latest polls. There are and yet it's Obama by 8 in Wisconsin. So it's a Walker-Obama strange phenomenon. That wouldn't it be nice if we had that in the country of Republicans who supported the president, and we might get something done in Congress.
I think the question becomes, do public unions have a right to insist on going back to the same over-the-barrel advantage they used to have over the taxpayer in Wisconsin, or is it time for that to never happen again? You do see the conflict of interest here. You see the disparity of the dynamic between collective bargaining with public unions versus collective bargaining for private unions, do you not?
Well, you give up a lot when you give a life of public service. You give up an enormous amount of profit incentive that you don't have in the private world, and that's what you do because your ego is driven by what you can do for people. So there should be something given in return to the public servant. I'm not one who slams public workers and government workers and is cynical, because that just to me means that other people have chosen not to be involved in public service because they would choose to be in the private sector. So I
just don't see Wisconsin going back to that. But I don't want to stick with that forever.
Well, let me draw a question out of
that.
Go
ahead.
Are you also against, therefore, defense contractors having 401ks with their enormous amounts of money that they make from the federal government if you're against public sector pensions?
I am not against public sector pensions. I'm against public unions having an over-the-barrel advantage over the taxpayer. I don't like the people
think so. I
who
think
are representing taxpayers
have a big advantage over the teachers, and that's not the way it should be.
Those representing the taxpayers find greater reward in giving in, yielding, acquiescing, buckling under, surrendering. Use the verb you want.
All right, the verb I want is helping our teachers instead of our defense contractors. I'll take what the teachers do for our kids more than what the defense contractors did for us in Afghanistan.
The Republicans stopped shooting at each other, so that is helpful. And just this past week, we had some very bad job numbers. That doesn't help any incumbent, but it's a long way from Election Day.
We're going to have the next 4 months of what the tables are now calling dead news, because nothing really matters until about 4 months from now when you get into the real election. And we're all going to have these back and forth on the polls for the next 4 months.